This is Metabolic Mastery, a KORR Medical Technologies podcast dedicated to advancing knowledge and practice in metabolic testing. Welcome to Metabolic Mastery, brought to you by KORR Medical Technologies. I'm Dr. Marc Humbert, this is Dr. Garber, and today we've got Daniel Crumback with us again. He is KORR's Director of International Sales. He's also the Director of Strategic Health and Performance. He's a certified exercise physiologist, a chartered physiotherapist, and a certified strength and conditioning coach. So it's always fun to have Daniel on and get to talk about some things. What we wanted to look at today was to dive into what we can look at in terms of the respiratory system in testing. So a lot of people that do this type of testing only look at VO2 max.
Mm-hmm.
You've got another set of people that are only looking at the metabolic values. And there's very few people that are looking at the respiratory values. And it really is a treasure trove of data. Lots that we can look at in there. Daniel is the resident expert on that. And so I'm excited to have him here today. He's going to go over some tests and take a deep dive into what we can look at, kind of some of the hidden data, if you will, that people often don't look at. So
yeah, I'm excited to learn myself. So it's always fun to go over this stuff again and learn. And so, yeah, we're excited to have you on again, Daniel. And it's always fun when we get a chat with Daniel. He's awesome, and I'm excited to learn.
Thanks. I always love coming back, and this is a particularly interesting topic for me because I started really looking hard at the respiratory data probably about 20 years ago, and it was just like all the data's there, but nobody pays any attention. I mean, even if you get tested at a university level, they don't use the respiratory data. In fact, if they use anything, you got VE, VO2, VE, VCO2, and the inherent problems with VE. VE, there's good VE and bad VE, as I teach. You know, if you hyperventilate and use low volumes, you still get a high VE, and that's not good. So I don't trust VE. It's something that I learned a long time ago. Is it's much better to look at the individual values. And then you also need to recognize the fact that the respiratory system can limit function and performance.
Such a good point you bring up right there, because as we've talked about before, as you'll see in most exercise physiology textbooks still, it says, you know, the respiratory system is rarely going to be the limiter of performance, and kind of brushes aside. And so I think this is especially relevant because, like, there are definitely times that it can be the limiter. And, go check out some of the previous podcasts that we've had with Daniel, where he talks about like, what's the primary limitation that people are facing, addressing that. And then that often takes care of other things, or we can just move on to the next limitation down the line. So love that you brought that up.
Yeah. Well, for example, like, I mean, I teach this on my course. It's if you hyperventilate, then what will happen is that you'll decrease CO2 at the muscle cell. You'll cause hypocapnia. And the effects of hypocapnia is therefore the O2 will not diffuse across and into the muscle cell from the hemoglobin. It will look like a metabolic issue, the inability to use O2, but the fact is it's not even offloading. So, it's clear that you got to look at it as its individual input to function and performance, but also its influence on other systems. So, even if you hyperventilate, you can have profound effects at the heart and the brain. Your decision-making processes go down with decreased CO2 at the brain. And you can also have effects on not only the metabolic system, but cardiovascularly. You can have changes that will lead to vasodilation. And if you do, you get vasodilation, you get decreased blood return to the heart, so therefore decreased preload, so therefore decreased cardiac output. So everybody likes to stay within their systems, but that's not how the body works.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. When people try to find a solution that doesn't really fit the physiology of how things actually work, right? It always causes problems.
And it can happen with the respiratory system at any intensity. That's the amazing part. People think of it's only at high intensity, but the fact is that you'll have people that'll hyperventilate in zone 2 and zone 3 and use their volume poorly. So, and then you'll have the issue again of decreasing CO2 levels and the effects that has on the rest of the systems themselves. And if they're
Yeah.
hyperventilating and they're running a 3-hour marathon, what's the cost on the respiratory system and on maximum oxygen uptake if the respiratory system is working so hard that it's stealing a large proportion of the O2 that's being delivered?
Yeah. Yeah. So Mark and I, even with a resting metabolic rate test, we're looking at cases today that of overbreathing during the resting metabolic test and the implications of that and how much it threw that off. So even at rest, overbreathing or a higher respiratory rate and everything throws the numbers off significantly.
Well, you have to actually know what, and this is part of our topic here. What's the normative data
Mm-hmm.
for tidal volume at rest? And it's not 1.6 liters. That's the overbreathing side, right? You see people breathing maybe 2-3 breaths a minute, but they're breathing 1.4 liters, and you're going, no, the normal is around 500 mils plus or minus, 200.
Right.
So I'm with you. I constantly monitor their respiratory frequency and volume during an RMR
Mm-hmm.
because of the fact that they're not giving us what we really need, which is how you breathe normally. And
Right.
yes, it has profound effects to the outcomes. You overbreathe. The fact is that you really can't trust your RMR data because you're not providing us with that actual state that we're looking for, how you normally breathe at rest.
Yeah, that's exactly. And so if you're not in that normal state of where they would be at rest, all the information you gather from that then is going to be, you know, quite a bit exaggerated. And so that's what we're seeing in these tests that we were looking at. All of them were coming back with higher values than what would be expected. And all of them we saw, yeah, expected compared to, the normative calculations, which we know are very off. Um, but yeah, it was just fascinating that every single one of them showed overbreathing. And so it's like, well, then that's why the handful of tests you sent that you're like, these values can't be right. Every one of them was overbreathing. And so then, yeah, whether that's volume or rate, it's going to cause big problems because that's, like you said, to your point, that's not how they normally breathe at rest. And
Right.
so we're not really measuring. And that's our primary rule with testing is test what you intend to measure, right?
And I always tell people stay in the room for the first 5 minutes.
Yeah.
You should be doing a 20-minute test. Stay in there and find out what they're doing.
Yeah. Well,
And
so
if they're breathing, 6 breaths and 900 or 1200 mils, they're still over breathing, and they need
yep.
feedback. They need to be told, no, this is, this is 7 hours of sleep. We're trying to get your breathing when you sleep. We're trying to get your breathing when you're answering emails on your computer, when you're reading a book, when you're watching TV. I don't need to know how you breathe in yoga class, nor be impressed with how well you can control your breathing. Well, with our devices, you can set it for 10 to 20 minutes. It'll shut down when it feels you've reached a resting state.
Hmm.
Um, none of those guys ever get there because the fact that they're so radical in their breathing, there's so many changes that they're going on because they have to breathe normally at some point during that 20 minutes.
Hmm.
And so the system picks up the fact that no, you just keep changing it all the time. And
Hmm.
then you look at the data and you can clearly see RERs flying all over the place.
Yeah.
And that it's not what you want out of the situation. And the same thing with the people that don't pay any attention to the respiratory data that's available when they're doing a VO2 max test.
Yep.
Well, I think
Yeah.
with the RMR test, what you said about having a little bit longer, there's always this balance between I'm trying to improve workflow and I'm trying to get valid data. And sometimes I think people err a little bit too much on the side of I want to get a rapid workflow in. and then there isn't time to see things settle, right? And you can see that in the test, right? Often there's that kind of rise in the beginning, and then people settle out. But you see some tests where it's just up and up and up and up, and there's never like they're never really getting into a relaxed state, and so like giving sufficient time for people to actually settle. It's interesting because some people I feel like settle pretty quick, and other people don't settle until towards the end of the test, and it's just different. So actually, I think this would be a good time to talk about real quick the different ways of looking at the RMR data.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's, I mean, yes, the information is rather basic, but the first thing you have to do is you need to look at the data that comes out and state whether it achieved its goal. Don't analyze bad data. So the first thing I do is just open the data and have a look at it, and be able to look and see whether we're actually capturing what we want to. Your next decision after that is what method you're going to use. And unlike a lot of other devices, I'm going to say something bad about other devices. First of all, you don't know what calculation they're using. You can't change the methodology on how you analyze it. And they tell people they can do an RMR in 10 minutes or less than 10 minutes. All of these are deficits in other systems. So the first thing you want to be able to do is, I always check their respiratory frequency, average respiratory frequency and volume, and make sure that we're not seeing overbreathing there. Then I look at the data and I make a decision out of the 3 methods that we offer people. Is this a good Douglas bag method for analysis? Is this a better for best 5 or last 5? And there's a reason why all 3 exist, because I toggle through them to make sure that I'm snapping the best 5 minutes, because it'll make a significant difference in what we give them as their RMR. So it's just that you don't even look at the numbers until you actually say, good, I've got good data spread out. This guy settled down fairly quickly. Therefore, Douglas bag uses the 5 minutes to the end. This might be a really good use of the Douglas bag method to be able to average that, that 5 minutes or up to 15 minutes of data. Whereas you got somebody, let's say, who settles very slowly, and finally in the last 5 minutes of the test, I can use last 5, and I usually set it to best 5, see where it picks, and see whether I agree with it or not. And at that point, then I can trust the information that's above. All the methods are viable. They're good to use at certain times, but you do have a responsibility to kind of go into the data itself and understand what it's doing. And that is looking for the best point within that 20-minute test. And as you guys know, almost nobody, you just watch the first 5 minutes of settling down.
Yeah.
So you should never use the first 5 minutes.
Exactly. So I was just talking to a researcher actually, who had done a bunch of tests on some other systems, an $80,000 card and all this stuff. And she said, well, we would always toss the first 7 minutes of any test. And I was like, yeah, our device does that as well. The first 5 minutes is automatically, taken out. And yeah, that same idea of it takes a while to settle. And like you were saying, sometimes you'll find somebody settles for the middle 10 minutes, and then the last 5, they're getting antsy again, going, shouldn't we be about done? And so, yeah, being able to switch methods to find what's the most appropriate for that person really is helpful, and such a powerful tool within the software.
So essentially that's, I am interested. You'll pick up the odd person who is breathing less than 500 mils, and they'll have an elevated breathing frequency around 14. That will be a cue for me to pay a lot of attention to their respiratory function during the ramp test. It's usually a good indicator that there's something going on that will transfer across to performance as well. So that's the other thing that I look at within the RMR data itself.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I love about testing with the cardio coach is that you can look at the data itself and at the graphs and just see how flat those lines are. And that's such a quick, without even diving into what the actual absolute numbers are, just looking at it and saying, was it flat and he had a high respiratory rate and a low volume? If it's flat and consistent that way, then it's like, okay, I do want to look at this factor in the exercise test. If it's kind of all over the place, then for me, I like to retest. If it looks like it's all over the place, then it's like, we didn't really get a good quality test. You never really settled in, and it's worth retesting. And I know, like Marc mentioned, that's difficult for workflow sometimes, but trying to get a test done in 10 minutes just likely is not going to get you enough quality data to really make that clinical assertion that is their resting metabolic rate.
Agreed. And, while I apologize to the owners and understand the importance of getting throughput, the fact is that you bought the device because you wanted to use real science. And honestly, that extra 10 minutes really doesn't affect you too much at all. Yes, it's double the length of time, but the fact is, leaving them there for that 20 minutes, or if they're really good at listening to you and good at relaxing, I mean, the device will shut off at 10 minutes if it feels it's captured the data. So
Right.
I always tell people, set it for between 10 and 20 minutes, and that works really well. And then you'll also notice certain things about personality types. So people, let's say they're anxious or they have ADHD, they tend to be the ones at the end where everything goes to hell. They just are not comfortable staying in one spot for like 20 minutes. And then you've got your guys that perhaps they have sleep apnea or obesity or a combination of the two. You'll see all kinds of, you'll see generally a lower volumes, higher frequencies, but you'll also see sections in which they take very, very, very deep breaths. And it's fun to be able to see their pattern that they use when they're breathing at rest.
I think understanding what we kind of expect for the test and then seeing deviations from there can be really helpful. So I just want to, just for listeners, when we're talking about looking at the data before the test to see if it's usable data, let's talk, I know you mentioned it before, but let's talk normative values. Like, what are we looking at for tidal volume? What are we looking at for respiratory rate? And then kind of what would detail some of the common things that we see. So what does overbreathing mean? What does unstable breathing mean? Some of those things.
People don't tend to overbreathe on unless they're doing it absolutely on purpose. So, I rarely find somebody who has a higher frequency and low volumes that doesn't actually have a respiratory limitation. I will find people with higher volumes, like above 800 mils. So obviously it depends on the age and gender and the size of the person. So if you're looking at it, I know that a male of 6'2" who's 24 years old will be around 800 mils. And I know that a small older female will be 400 to 500 mils. There's not a large range at rest. The funny part, it's quite compact. But if you have somebody who's, let's say, done some reading and they're, an oxygen advantage fan, they will try and impress you with their abilities. And you're going, no, well, they'll be breathing. Honestly, I've seen people into over 2 liters for a period of the test.
Wow.
And you're going, there's not a chance in hell. And their frequencies would be really low. So they might be around 2. We even have people that will log 0 for a period of time. But if they're above 1 liter, it's highly skeptical. Unless they happen to be, a 6'8", 7'2" basketball player who's 20 years old. So that will tell us that they're over breathing. And the issue with that is, it's not that you're upset with them for doing it. It's the fact that they don't understand what the test is for. I don't want that portion of your day if you breathe like that. I want your normal part of your day. And even when I explain it to people that the volumes you want is like the volumes when you're sleeping. We're trying to count for 7 hours of sleep in this. You're certainly not breathing like that. And I defy you to watch a movie for 90 minutes and breathe like that the whole 90 minutes. So we have to use the normative values that we'd expect to see to be able to determine whether the data that we receive from the tests is usable.
Yeah, which I think is really helpful, just to define those things so that we know, like, okay, when we're seeing data outside of that. So as you were talking, I was looking at the different tests again that Marc and I were discussing, and it was interesting. All of them were cut off at 10 minutes. And so that's something I hadn't noticed before. I was just looking at the values. I didn't notice that every single one of the tests was cut off at 10 minutes. And, we had already detected like there was over breathing in every single one of the tests. And they're like, why are these coming back high? But every one of them had respiratory rates around 20 breaths per minute and, higher volumes than you would expect, or sometimes lower volumes than you would expect, but high respiratory rates. It's like, well, then all of that tracks that you're going to get a number that doesn't make sense for that person.
And our system will shut down not so much based upon what they're breathing, but when RER reaches a steady state. Rhythm that could kind of tell you this. It's something that you need to go in and have a look at the data, and it will shut down on 10 minutes, even though you didn't get what you feel to be a viable test. According to our algorithm for giving you feedback, it was a viable test. But you still have a responsibility to look at the data and be able to say, actually, we're going to do a retest. He said, oh, I thought that was good. No, your numbers are off because of the fact that you weren't breathing in a resting state itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to do that, but I'm going to really monitor your breathing frequency and your tidal volumes and make sure that you're breathing within a set of norms.
Yeah. And I think so. People have the option of terminating the test early within the software. I think they're setting their test lengths at 10 minutes, it would seem. And so, that's going to definitely limit data if we're not allowing it to at least let the computer pick when it's done, or go to that 20 minutes. And it just takes what it takes to allow people to relax. So that's really helpful in helping people get a better test quality.
What's hilarious is if I do my RMRs, done in 10, within about 2 minutes, everything's normalized. And then it quits at 10. Everything is where it should be. It's just because I know what I need to do to be able to get accurate data. But as you know, to try and get this across to people with a nose piece on and a mouthpiece in their mouth, and they hear the word test, it's really hard to get people not to really hear what you're saying. You just want to relax. If you fall asleep, even, that's fine. But it's better than sitting there and concentrating on it.
So to that point, if you would run us through really quick some of the things that you're looking at to generate a quality RMR test, like what are some of the main things that you're doing to get that level of consistency with what you're doing? And a lot of it is just, I've done this so many times. But what are some tips that you could give our listeners to help make that higher quality, to know what to look for to help them get better quality data?
I think the biggest thing is explain to them what you're trying to do. Don't talk so much about the test, but say, what we're trying to do is capture your breathing in those situations. We're trying to capture your 7 hours of sleep. We're trying to capture what you're like when you're deep into watching a TV show, or when you're reading a book. And I said, there's no concentration on your breathing at that point. And if you do concentrate and change your breathing style, what that's going to do is change the numbers. The other thing I tell people, which they have a hard time with, is even at rest, you're going to get to a certain point where you're breathing quite shallow and you're going to take a deep breath. I said, don't worry about it. Do that. We want it to be as normal as possible. If you want to take a deep sigh or, a swallow or anything like that, just go ahead and do it. It's not going to show up as that big of a data change because it's going to be less than, maybe 5 seconds. So it's not going to change the data significantly over a 20-minute test. But I think people need to understand the purpose of what we're doing. And that if you don't do that, then the analysis of your RMR will be wrong. And it won't be the device's fault. It's collecting gas as well. It's applying the formulas correctly. It's you that is changing everything. And so I try and really get away from talking about certain types of breathing. I strictly go, we've got to capture you at rest. And these are the situations that we're looking at.
Yeah. And that's exactly my instruction as well, is it's like, we want to get you as close to a rested state. Like if you could take a nap, that'd be great. We want to get you as close to a rested state as possible. And so don't control your breathing. Try not to think about that. Just go to your place of Zen and just let it happen, type of a thing. And that's really my instruction, is just to try to get them to get out of their head about their breathing as much as possible. Yeah, let's dive into the exercise values
tests.
now.
Yeah, I know you have some different tests to take a look at, but just guide us through, what do we want to look at for respiratory values in our exercise tests? How are we identifying some of the limitations? What are the things to look at? Again, what's the kind of hidden data that no one looks at that can actually be really helpful in finding some of those limitations that are affecting performance and health?
Yeah.
Cool. I'll do a quick little bit. After my RMR, I do spirometry. You don't have to do spirometry to get really good respiratory data out of the cardio coach. And I'll show you how to do it without spirometry information. This is just additional information because of the fact that I use many different types of respiratory training, and the respiratory training is very particular to having a capacity issue. In other words, you have non-normal spirometry values versus a capability issue where you can't use the volumes that you have well. So I define them that way. If you have the data from the cardio coach, the one thing that you'll have is you won't know whether it's a capacity issue. Is the breathing that we're seeing because they have poor capacity, or is it because they can't use their capacity well? So you're kind of left with a little bit of a question mark. But it still helps you define without any extra testing or investment in spirometry itself. And those that don't have it, but they pick up the values that I'm discussing, may just simply want to send them to their doc for a PFT or spirometry, a pulmonary function test. And some of this is just getting background information. I don't like asking people beforehand any questions about their conditions, their training, anything. I don't want to know anything about them. I want to be able to explain to them what I'm seeing there. So a natural question afterwards is, respiratory system seems to be your biggest limiter. Have you been told you have a respiratory condition? And then, of course, you can determine whether they have any medications associated with that as well. So when I complete my ramp test, part of my analysis is looking at respiratory frequency and tidal volumes from different perspectives. I also look at, there's a metric a lot of us use, or VO2 pulse, which is a good look at kind of cardiovascular efficiency, but nobody uses VO2 over BF, which is the same thing in respect to the respiratory system. So I also look at how much oxygen they consume per breath. And it really gives you outstanding idea of where they're the most efficient within all the intensities that you test during the ramp test itself. So what I would do normally, and I'm going to share a screen here. So within our software, especially with the Cardio Coach Pro, you can build any graph that you wish. So within the Cardio Coach, there's tidal volume, so the amount of air you move per breath, and your breathing frequency or respiratory frequency, the number of breaths you take per minute, is available. With the Pro, I've added heart rate on to my graphs. So you can, so I want to be able to see the change in the intensity in relation to how they breathe. And what's lovely about, obviously, the Cardio Coach is if you double click it, you can open it up. So this is a ramp test. For those that are paying attention, you'll actually see changes in heart rate in relation to the changes in the breathing frequency as well. That's a whole different ball game there. So sitting here is, for example, respiratory frequencies. So at this point, they're breathing 27.1 breaths per minute. And at the end of the test, they're breathing 60 breaths a minute. And then if you're looking at their tidal volumes, for example, they're breathing 785 mils here and going up to 1.9 liters here. And you'll start to pick up patterns that are very different. This person is a person that increases their frequencies and their volumes at the same time. It's just their strategy, right? And then what I do is I look at their peak volume. So what are they able to consistently achieve for a maximum amount of volume within the test? And it's 1.9 liters here, 1.7 liters here. And you can see that the breathing frequency is shooting up. I would probably pick somewhere that they could do consistently at maybe 1.8 liters. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because the 1.9 liters, they're only able to do once. That's 1 15-second spot. So what I would do is say, okay, well, 1.8 liters. And what you want to be able to do is say, okay, is that good? And that's my favorite question when I'm doing a review. I said, hey, your maximum value is about 1.8 liters. Is that good? And their answer should be, I don't know, because of the fact that they have no reference to it. And this is what we're talking about, is having norms. I can then take that peak value, that's the maximum they can use, and then I can look at the end of the test, and during recovery, what happens to the breathing? So in some cases, what you'll see volume shoot up during recovery. And you realize that they had more access to volume
Mm-hmm.
when they weren't moving. As soon as they stopped moving, they all of a sudden were able to take in, 800 mils, 1.2 liters more. And that will tell you something else. So in that particular case, if you see a large jump in volume at the end, they have an issue with being able to breathe, a capability issue related to breathing while moving. And of course, these are all different of whether you're testing somebody in running or ambulation versus somebody who's on a bike. All the values will change with cyclists. The volumes will go higher, the frequencies will go down on average because of the fact that they're tripoded in. Their seats, their butts on a seat, their hands are on the handlebars. They're able to stabilize their trunk. So with runners, paying attention to a large increase of greater than, let's say, 10% of their value during rest will tell you that this person is using their respiratory system for one of its other roles, which is posture and stiffness. And the first thing you would do is you would consider doing some testing of their core. And you could also ask them a couple of simple questions. Have you had a long history of low back problems? Expect them to answer yes. Or do you have issues with incontinence? So, of course, because of the pelvic floor muscles themselves, those people that jump up and down or laugh too hard and piddle themselves, they'll fit in that type of population. And it offers you the ability to concentrate a little bit more on taking the load away from the diaphragm in the stabilizing of the trunk to be able to go back to doing its full-time job of just delivering oxygenated O2 to the cells themselves. So going back to the values here, what we need to do is we need to go somewhere where the norms are. So in that particular case, it's stated that it's 1.2 liters. And what we have to do is we have to collect the information on the individual because it has to be based upon them. So yeah, it's important to note that, different activities you'll see differences in the respiratory load. And obviously with cyclists, it makes it, as soon as they stand up, they're more like, you'll see their numbers change to be more like running. Because of course, core stability is one of the jobs of the diaphragm, along with, a lot of people don't realize that the respiratory system's other major role is, of course, thermoregulation. So the challenges associated with working at higher temperatures will be transferred directly to the lung itself. So going back to looking just at straight volume on this individual, like we said, their peak volume is around 1.8 liters, and we have to know whether that's good or not. So in order to look and see whether that's good, we need to know who the individual is, because we need the norms for them. So looking here, this individual is a 16-year-old female at 187 centimeters. So for those people that are in the foot and inches world, that's probably 6'3", 6'4". So what is she good at?
Volleyball.
She's a basketball player. Yeah.
Oh, there we
Basketball
go.
player.
Yeah, basketball player.
Opened up.
So what we're going to do now is we need a set of norms. So the best set of norms for respiratory data is the GLI, or the Global Lung Function Initiative, and with hundreds of thousands of people. And all you have to do in here is, we stated that she was 16 and was 187 and is female. And if you look underneath, if you hit spirometry, you could also hit their ethnicity. In this particular case, it's an African American female. Why is this here? Is because the fact that it's been proven that different ethnicities have different size of lungs. So you don't have to do it that way. You could hit race neutral, and this is free to use online. And then all you have to do is go in and make sure you're not a robot, and then calculate. And what will come up is normative data for the FEV1 and FVC in particular. So the FVC is forced vital capacity. So that's where you get the person to take a deep breath in and then breathe out everything they have in their lung within 6 seconds. And that will tell you approximately their lung capacity fully, not just their vital capacity. That's just when they're regularly breathing, but forced vital capacity is after a deep breath in and forcing the air out. And it'll also give you FEV1, and that's the forced expiratory volume in 1 second. And that's collected during the FVC. And again, you deep breath in, you're going to breathe out everything as hard as you can, as fast as you can. And it's the amount of air that should come out in 1 second, the first 1 second. And why that's really important is because of the fact that, as you saw, that person was breathing 60 breaths a minute at peak. So we used the 1 second value, and this, I hate to say this, this all came from me. This did not exist before I started doing it. If people are doing it now, it's because what I did. And in fact, I'm happy to say that research has been done on it afterwards, not by me. And it works really well. There's a ratio of what should come out in the first 1 second in relation to the full volume that comes out in 6 seconds. And in this particular case, 87% of their total volume should have come out in the first 1 second. And those numbers will be really high because she's 16. As you get older, it drops to 80, 78, 76 as you go down. Yes, your FVC and FEV1 comes down a bit, but not as big as the ratio of what you can get out in 1 second versus your total volume. It gives you the predicted, but it also gives you the lower linear and upper linear numbers. In other words, what's the ranges around this median? And I love the fact that it provides you with that.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that if they're below this number, they're restricted, but how low is low? The bottom of the range, the bottom 5% is 3.3 liters, and the top 5% is 5.1 liters. So if you're working with a really high level athlete, you don't expect them to hit norms. You expect them to be above the norm towards the upper linear numbers, especially in sports that require the respiratory system significantly. So I take the norm of the 1 second value, which is 4.2, let's call it 4.25. And I know they should be able to breathe 75 to 85% of that number as their peak value. But if you take, as we stated, their peak value was 1.8 liters, and you divide it by 4.25 liters, you get 42%. This is an athlete, and she's getting 42%. That's a severe respiratory limitation. And we can't state its capacity because we've not done spirometry on them.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful to note and to be able to see. That's the limiter for her. Yeah.
And in an athlete, right? Being able to know those norms, and to what you said, they should be towards that upper end of the norm. If we're not seeing that, then it's like, okay, like somehow they're still able to perform in this sport, but man, we could make this so much easier on them. Someone that's already performing well could move to the next level of performance. And so I think having an understanding of what that should be, how they compare to norms, can be really helpful for saying, like, what's next? What do we do next?
Yeah.
So as we're talking about norms, again, it's a matter of going into finding their peak volume and then going back to the GLI and being able to determine what percentage of FEV1, or the 1 second value. Now you're left over and you're looking at respiratory frequency patterns in relation to this. So if we went down and zoned this person, let's say we decided this is zone 1, this is zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, and let's pretend that this last kick up of the respiratory frequency is zone 5. What is their average breathing frequencies within that? So there are 28 breaths here. Believe it or not, they went up to 40 breaths, back down to 27 breaths. In zone 2, they're pushing 33 breaths, and in zone 4, they're in 47 breaths, and zone 5, they're in 60 breaths. All of these are well above the norms for breathing by zone. And this is the only way that you should be looking at this, is how are they breathing in each of the zones? And what I teach is zone 1 should be between 18 and 22 breaths. Zone 2 should be between 20 and 26 breaths. 3 runs about 26 to 32, 32 to 40, and above 40, but less than 50 as a peak in zone 5. So in this particular case, we see what we think we'd always see, which is they have decreased volume, so therefore they hyperventilate. Is that what most people would think, right?
Yeah, that would be a natural supposition.
Yet they were using 1.8 liters here, but when they were working at low intensities, they were using less than 500 mils. If they can breathe 1.8 liters at 55 breaths, they sure in hell can breathe that amount at 20. So this is a really bad habit as well. Even if we don't change this maximum value, we can at least get them to use their values better at a lower intensity. And we think about basketball, what's the potential reasons and the effects of hyperventilation with low volume in basketball?
Well, the effects are going to be, feeling more fatigued, more out of breath as you're running up and down the court. Shooting your free throws, you're going to be more jittery and stuff because you're catching your breath all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. On top of that, to accurately deliver a shot, you need a stable core. And there's no way with a breathing pattern like this that you couldn't simply move this person aside and go by them, because they wouldn't be able to stabilize enough to be able to block you. So shooting accuracy would go down. The ability to be able to block would go down. This person would be really easy to run over. So there's a bunch of other things. And if she's breathing this quickly, the effects of hypocapnia, what's her decision-making capability like? So this is where people don't see the application to the sport or to function as much as they should. This pattern, she might have to do it because of the fact that she might have a respiratory capacity issue that can be dealt with by doing a pulmonary function test, identifying if that's the issue, and if it is, then doing respiratory training to improve their capacity. If they go and find out their capacity is good, but they can't use it, they have poor capability, it's different types of respiratory training to work on that. But all of which would not only help them physiologically and the effects on all the other physiological systems besides the respiratory system, but the immediate changes in their function and their performance would be amazing to them.
I want to talk about one point really quick, which is just one of the really important things to look at. And what you mentioned earlier is having the data across the whole test, right? We can see what's happening from the beginning all the way through the end, and even after the test is finished. So there's some people that will do this test. They'll immediately take off the mask because, like, let's be honest, it's not the most comfortable at those high intensities. And then you lose that end data. And so when we can see what happens across the test and as you go into recovery, that gives us valuable information that we might miss otherwise. So what you mentioned earlier is like, okay, when they stop running and they go to walking, now they can use a higher volume. And so if we're not getting all of the data and seeing start to peak to recovery, then there are things that we'll miss out on, and interventions that we might miss out on that would be useful in helping them, use more of their capacity, understand whether it's capacity capability. So
Yeah, absolutely. Even there's strategies. So I work with a lot of high level cyclists, and the one thing that I notice that they try and do is after an extremely hard effort. Let's say they're climbing to the top of a hill, and they're trying to be in the lead group, and then what they have in front of them is an extremely steep, difficult downhill to do. They'll try and get their breathing working really hard, slowed down really quickly, but they're going to have elevated levels of CO2, and therefore they're going to be acidotic at the cell. And then what they're going to do is they're going to clamp their legs in and be very rigid on the ride back down. So what I try and do is get them to understand that you can actually use strategies of blowing off the CO2 if you don't decrease your frequencies when you hit the top. Allow yourself to keep your respiratory frequencies fairly high, around 40 breaths, 30, 40 breaths, instead of driving to bring them down to 20 right away. And that will help blow off the CO2, which allow you again to be able to control acidosis at the muscle cell and therefore be able to do more work. But not only that, it'll also help with quick decision-making skills from the brain that may lead to you not crashing. So is a lot of important data after the test. And I make it very clear to my guys, you are not allowed to take your mask off after a test. I need that data. I need to see what's your method of recovery, how quickly you recover. Yeah, there's really important data. I like to see how quickly they can clear CO2, because of the fact we know that CO2 is directly tied to hydrogen ions. You can also know that it's tied to inorganic phosphates. And you're better off keeping your breathing frequency high to be able to normalize or reach homeostasis at the cell much more quickly. So it's really interesting. This is a really interesting one for straight out bad volume and hyperventilation throughout. But the one thing you could immediately see is, well, if you can breathe 1.8 at 50 breaths a minute, at least I can get you to start slowing down your frequencies in zone 2 and increasing your volumes early. And a simple way of doing that is just giving someone a metronome. And most apps have metronomes now, of which you would set them to, let's say, 24 beats, and you get them to breathe 2 beats either side of that. So from 22 to 26. They will go after the volume instead of breathing, in this particular case, 33 breaths a minute. They'll go after the volume early, and it's just a matter of training. This is coordination more than anything. So there's always something you can do at some portion of the test. But you've got somebody who has obviously one of the biggest limiters at the high end of the test is the respiratory frequency. How willing are you to give out zone 5 intervals to that individual? Yeah, until you deal with the respiratory limitation. So it helps you make really good decisions of going, at this particular point, I'm going to concentrate on other systemic limitations while I fix the respiratory limitation. Then we're going to re-challenge the system, and she's actually going to be able to do zone 5 without just exhausting her respiratory system.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you have to wonder how much that's a symptom of the way they've been coached and trained in the past of doing max intervals when they're not prepared, when they're not ready. doing sprints in the gym as part of their workouts when the athletes maybe aren't ready for that.
Well, I think that's so important to understand because, we're always working within some set of constraints. When anyone is working on improving performance, working on improving health, there's a variety of constraints. And what we want to try to do is get the most bang for our buck within those constraints. And so if we are trying to train areas that are limited by something else that needs to be addressed, then we're kind of spinning our wheels in a sense, right? We're not optimizing what's going to be the most effective, what's going to be the best use of time, resources, all those things to really help them. And so I think this becomes valuable. This is a maybe teaser for a future episode that we've talked about with Daniel, but it is really like earning the right to do zone 5 intervals, right?
Right.
What does that look like to prepare ourselves so that we can not only absorb the training, but also benefit from the training that we're doing, so that we make the most use of time, resources, all those other things.
Yeah.
And my wish out of this is that people who are listening is if you're not looking at the data, start looking at the data.
Mhm.
Because it'll open up your eyes to all kinds of issues. And if you doing respiratory training, I beg of you, do not jump on bandwagons of a lot of people out there who are talking about like increasing CO2 tolerance and a bunch of other stuff. Reach out. I'm happy to have a discussion. It's essentially you've got to approach this like either a physio or a strength conditioning coach, and it should make sense. If they lack mobility and stability, then a physio and a strength conditioning coach can handle these things. If they're missing power, you need to approach it completely different. If they're missing endurance, you need to approach it differently. And nothing is going to change their breathing up here at this effort by lying on the floor and doing breathing. It just is not going to transfer. So be very cautious what's out there. Be cautious with the different devices that are out there. If I give this person a resistive device to train with, the first thing they're going to do is become even stiffer and move and make it harder for them to move poor volume. We would never do that with anybody else. And so if you're truly interested in using the data and you're interested in training, reach out to me, and I can make recommendations on training methodology and which devices are best used in which situation. All right, so this is another example. This is a 34-year-old male, 187 centimeters and 112 kilos, so big lad. Again, what you're looking for is the pattern first. Never look for numbers, look for patterns. This one's a lot more coordinated. Again, you're seeing changes in volume and frequency at the same time. It doesn't need to be that way. People will go after the volumes first and then the frequencies. Some people will go after the frequencies and then their volumes. In general, on average, you see a combination of the two happening. So you can see within the test, the best volume that they were capable of moving was 2.9 liters, but on average, there's 2.77, there's 2.74. So if we give them a peak average is about 2.8, right? Yep. So we can say their peak VT is at 2.8 liters. We notice at the end of the test that there's a jump here, and they're capable of going up to 3.3 liters. Saying, okay, potentially this person, we want to pay attention to their core stability, etc. The other thing we don't see here as frequencies go up, we don't see a decline in volume. You see that a lot. So as soon as you start breathing, let's say over 30 breaths a minute, they can't maintain the volume. So there's a bunch of different patterns you can look for. In this particular case, he maintains their volume even when he peaks out at 40 breaths. So this person's top is not that high. We expect him between 40 and 50 breaths. And part of the reason is when I look back, my automatic reaction is this is a VO2 peak, not a max. And you go back to the VO2 and you go, yes, this is a peak. There's data off the right. So you have to remember that if you're looking at your VO2s, is it a peak or a max? And always remember that you might see data at the top end that are not representative of maximum effort. If we go down into the frequencies, this is between 16 and 18 and 22. Breathing frequencies here between 23 and 26. They bring their frequencies up to into the 30s for zone 3, into the 40s for zone 4. Zone 5 is off the right. So as far as this guy's respiratory frequencies, they're pretty good. You got to look at them by zone. So you got to zone first and then look at them. So, and then we don't know what their value is that good? You know, they're able to do 2.8 liters. So we go to the GLI and we state that he's 34-year-old male, 187 male. We'll keep it race neutral. And we go in and we ask it for what the norms are. And we go up, and of course, they're a lot higher because this is a lad. And that's the big difference between this is the age. Well, it brought these numbers down, and the fact that he's a lad, they would have brought him up. So we're sitting around the same numbers. So he should be able to have FEC of 5.76 liters and FEV1 of 4.675. We know that his best is about 2.8, and then we use that 1 second value, and we divide that by the predicted FEV1. So 2.8 divided by 4.7, let's say, is 60%. So his highest value was 60%, and we want between 75 and 85%. It's really easy to do this once you use this system. It's a matter of actually just going in, finding out the predicted FEV1, and then going back and doing a calculation of their PVT. Now, if you end up in this situation, like I said, you've got to make a decision whether this is capacity or capability. So you can either refer them for a PFT or you can do your own spirometry. But the one thing I would say here is remember this person did not achieve a VO2 max. In this particular case, if you open up their VO2 test itself, you can see their O2 is continuing to rise significantly in the test. So, I'm not expecting that to be as bad as it looks because I expect them to be able to perform further to the right. But this still is a strong indicator that this is such a strong respiratory limitation that I would use my spirometry information, and I would use that to be able to determine what training I was going to do. But if you don't look at this data, there's an assumption that if a person's lacking volume, that they may hyperventilate. Last guy didn't at all. And you'll see people hyperventilate with good volume. So there's a myriad of different patterns. And essentially, you can't guess. You must just simply open the data. And it doesn't take long. Open up BFVT, look for the peak VT, compare it to the GLI. Do you have a problem or not related to volume? And then look at the respiratory frequencies to see if they fit in the normative ranges. If both of them are good, they get a blessing over their respiratory system, and you go on to the next one.
So one quick question that I have really quick about using the GLI calculator is, you mentioned we're comparing it against FEV1. And you mentioned the case like where they're at 60 breaths per minute at peak VT, that works pretty well because it's over 1 second. What if they are in the situation where they're at like 40 breaths per minute at peak VT? Like, what are you doing in that case to compare it to the GLI values? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Well, I would still use the FEV1, but I'm also smart enough to be able to look and go, the VO2 test is I didn't get a maximal effort. So there's still some data to the right. But why couldn't they? Why couldn't they complete the test? Why couldn't we not get a flattening or a decline in O2 that would indicate a VO2 max? The 1 second value is still extremely the best comparative to go against, is especially specific to their height and gender and age and ethnicity. So my expectation is if we could get them to complete this test, they would still have a major respiratory limitation, but I'm happy that they're not hyperventilating through it at all, because that would have profound effects on the cardiovascular and the metabolic systems themselves. Would it be a primary limitation? You have to look at how the metabolic system and the cardiovascular system responded and decide whether I'm going to train somebody else, and then we're going to revisit this. And I'm going to see whether I can push their VO2 to the right and I'll see how the respiratory system responded by doing so. I know it's a kind of a roundabout way of answering your question, but there's a reason why they'll achieve 40. Now, the norms for cycling is about 4 breaths lower. So they tend to top out at 45 breaths rather than 55 breaths. Their volumes will be higher for sure. You don't tend to pick up as many volume issues with cycling just because of the fact of that upright ambulatory position versus versus being locked into a tripod position. But you still pick them up. And those are the best. If you're working with elite athletes, it's the best. The guys that are, finishing, like I said, they're down 5th, always wondering why everybody's beating them. They do all the same training. Is because of the fact that nobody's isolated that had a respiratory limitation and then trained it.
Yeah, what you said earlier, I was thinking back to about how you're looking at the lung function. It's not 100% of that value. It's 75 to 85%. I think is what you expected. People are more on that elite and they're going to be closer to 85, a little younger, 85, and then down to
Correct.
75 as you get younger.
Yeah, your athletes will constantly be 80 to 85. And this is after looking thousands of tests over 30 years. So it's a matter of, if you see somebody who's above 85%, it's usually because their spirometry is wrong. That's usually the thing. If you're below 75, I'm okay with 75 to 85 for the general population. But you'll see people that are 40%, and they did give you a VO2 max. And you're just going, how long have you suffered? You hate exercising. Well, no wonder you feel like you're going to die, and nobody's addressed this specifically.
Well, I love that point because it's like, as we all know, exercise has so many wonderful effects on every system of the body. And if it can be like, oh no, you don't have, exercise does not have to be suffering. You don't have to hate exercise. Being able to look at this data has real world effects, and being able to look at the whole picture of a person's performance, right? It's like, oh, well, you can hit a VO2 max, but here's your respiratory frequency, here's these volumes. It's like our body is a mix of coordinated systems, right? We're not just a respiratory system. We're not just a cardiovascular system. We're not just a musculoskeletal system. It's all of those systems working in coordination over time. And so it's rarely just one thing, right? It's like, well, how does this thing have knock-on effects to this thing, and how does this affect this? And so if we can identify and respond to those limitations, then we can help. It's not just one system we're helping. We're helping the whole system working together.
And you can see on the first example why VE is a problem. She was hyperventilating to over 60 breaths a minute with really poor volume. But the VE would look fine. Oh, there's no problem. She's moving 160 liters a minute. And you're going, it's one of the only metrics that we combine something and then compare. And that's what really bothers me about VE is a total lack of respect for respiratory limitation.
And I think the power of that, of being able to identify things like that, the respiratory limitations, and how big of an impact that has on how people feel as they exercise. So many people are walking around with this backpack full of failures, right? Of all the things that they have struggled with in the past. And I was talking to a lady the other day on an Uber ride who was talking about how she hated exercise. It was so miserable, and she doesn't like to sweat, and she doesn't like to, feel uncomfortable. And it just made me think, oh, honey, you really should come in and do this test, and it would change your life, because we could help you exercise according to your body and where your body's at, and help fix some of those issues, like her breathing, like I guess we can't fix the sweating, but fixing some of those issues that make it so uncomfortable for her, including the idea that she has to work out at an intensity that probably isn't right for her at the beginning, and let her exercise according to her body and actually enjoy it instead of being miserable and suffering the whole time. And you give people that hope back of like, oh, I can be an athlete, or I can exercise without it being miserable. And it's life-changing for people.
And you can't train yourself out of a respiratory volume issue, no matter how many hours you spend running and cycling. It's not going to move. If anything, it's going to get worse. So it's it's something that people just don't realize, and it's been really taken advantage of out there by people who are misrepresenting what needs to happen. But you really can, with appropriate respiratory training, it needs to be very specific to the type of respiratory limitation, make massive changes in volume, and therefore allow them to be able to normalize their frequencies in those cases in which they're hyperventilating. And obviously allow them to work at a higher intensity and get all the benefits of working at a higher intensity without struggling with just being able to breathe.
Yeah. Yeah. And what a game changer that could be for people.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Daniel. Sorry, that was weird how I said that. Cut there. Thanks so much for joining us, Daniel. If people want to learn more from you, learn more about you, how can they get in contact? I know you also have a new course coming out that covers a lot of this stuff in depth and is designed to really give people an in-depth understanding of how to look for and respond to these types of limitations.
So they can reach out to me through Strategic Health and Performance. And as well as on that site, if they go to the physiological testing analysis and programming, so it's called PTAP page, you can actually get a link directly to where I hosted. So it's live, it's online, you complete it at your own time. It is lockstep, it is in depth. So if you really want to know about physiology and you really want to know about testing and analysis, the physiology section alone is for over 4.5 hours of material. And I do cover identification of respiratory limitations through the analysis section there. So just you can go to strategichealthperformance.com. I just got rid of the and because it was getting really low. And also, you can go to the KORR certifications page and you'll see not only mine, but some of your courses as well available, depending on the topic and how in depth you want to go into it.
And that link for that certification page is korr.com/resources/certifications. And so if you go to that, you'll be able to look at all of the different certifications we have on that page, including Daniel's new and excellent course. So we're excited about that. Stay tuned for emails, in fact, for discounts and other things, it sounds like. So we're excited about that for sure. I may be one of the first people to sign up. I'm excited to learn more and dive through it. So
okay, well, again, thanks for joining us. And as always, remember, if you want more content like this, like, follow, and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time. Ready to take your metabolic testing to the next level? Visit KORR.com to learn more about purchasing our metabolic test equipment.